So let's suppose I wanted to write, I decided it would be handy to have a function that, to have some functions that work with arrays. I suppose there's two functions that I want to write that work with arrays. And instead of starting up with a main program and all that kind of stuff, I'm not going to do that. The functions I'm writing are going to be functions that will be really handy to have in different programs. So I'm just going to start out with a file with my functions in it. So I'm going to say project, add new item, and my new item is going to be a CPP file. And I'm going to call my file array func, because that's what it's going to call it, store. It's going to store array functions. Okay. No, I'm not going to call it that. I'm going to call it I'm going to call it array function, just because I already have a file by the other name on my thing. Okay. So I could call it whatever I want, but it's a file that's going to contain array functions. Now, let's see. Something that would be very, very handy. So I'm going to just write two functions in here that deal with arrays. One thing that would be very, very handy, that is very, very handy, that you do quite a lot with arrays, is you print out all the elements of an array. So I'm going to write a function that does that. Okay, so I'm going to write a function, and I'm going to call it, let's see, I'm going to call it print out, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to write a function. It's not going to return anything. It's going to be called, I'll call it print array. That's a nice name because that's what it's going to do. And the function is going to take two parameters. So whenever this function is called, two things have to be provided. This particular function is going to print out int arrays. So two parameters have to be provided. The first thing that has to be provided is the array that I want to print out. So here I've said that the first parameter for this function is an int array. Okay, and its name is list. That's all that says. And the second parameter for this function, well, if I want to print out this array, I have to know how many elements are in it. So I'm going to need the size of it. So I'll have a second parameter. I'll call it how many. I could call it size. I could call it whatever I want. I'll just call it how many. And so all this says is that so far that this function, let's see, this function will now put an array, all array elements. So output array elements. How's that? Okay. So all this says so far. Oh, sorry. Duh. All it says so far is that I have this function called print array. It doesn't return anything. It accepts two parameters. One of them is an array of integers, and the other one is the number of integers in the array. Okay? Okay. Now, actually, writing your functions first like this, I haven't even really thought what the main program does yet. But you know, writing your functions first like this really point out something I've been trying to emphasize, and that's a function is totally separate from its main program. Your function does its task, right? And then any program that needs that task to be done can call your function. So you don't want to be thinking about your main at all when you do it. So what do I have here when I go to write this function? I have two pieces of information that have been provided. I have an array, and I know how many things are in it. I know how many elements are in it. Right. So how would I print out all the elements of an array? Well, you know how to do that. If you had an array that had how many items in it, you wanted to print all the items out, you would write a little for loop for I equals 0 while I is less than how many, and I equals I plus 1. And let's see, cout list at I, right? This happens to be printing them out one per line. Right, that code, if I had an array list and I was printing out all the elements, you've written a loop like this before. I think you've probably written one in a previous program, right? So there's nothing There's nothing strange about this loop. There shouldn't be. If you know that list is an array with how many items. This is your classic array for, your classic loop for printing out an array, right? Okay. The only thing, again, that's a little bit strange is that the array is coming in through a parameter list, and how many is coming from a parameter list. But that just means you know they're available to you when this function's called. Now, of course, I've read squiggly lines. This is all that's in this file. And the C++ Visual Studio is already looking at it saying, well, I can tell you there's going to be a problem already. I don't know what cout is. I don't know what endl is. So when we go to compile this file, there's going to be a problem. So you know, what do I need at the top of this file? Yeah, I need to include, I'm going to need, since for this file to translate or compile correctly, I'm going to need that. Okay, so now, great, so I have a function. Let's see, let's put another function in here. So this is handy. Anytime I know from the way I've written this, anytime I have an array of ints, I can just call print array with that array. I can call that this print array function and pass in the array and the number of things in it, and this function will take care of printing everything out. Great, very handy. Let's suppose something else I wanted to do was, I don't know. Let's suppose I wanted to sum I wanted to write a function that would sum an int array. Well, I might call my function sum array. I don't have to, the name array doesn't have to be in the function name. I'm just calling it that because it's descriptive. And sum array, if sum array was going to sum all the elements of an int array, it would have to take one of the parameters would have to be an int array. And then, of course, if I was going to sum all the numbers in my array, I have to know how many there are, right? So I could call it how many. This time I'll call it size just to be different. And of course, sum array is the function sum array is going to need a return value. If what this function is doing is adding together all the values in an array, probably what it's returning is the sum that it has calculated, right? So the return type would be int. Okay, so it looks a lot like print array, except it has a different return type because it's going to give something back. And again, just now writing the internals of this function. The function definition should always have a function should always have a comment saying what it says. Huh? I did. Yeah, I keep thinking it's the other day. Okay, let's see. This function computes the sum of elements and array. Okay. Okay, so again, this function, just looking at it separately, if I was going to write it, and I had an array, and I knew how many things were in it, and I had to add everything together. Well, if I was adding a bunch of stuff together, I know I probably need a variable. I probably need a variable for adding stuff together, so I'll declare this variable total. And then I can compute the sum again with that same for loop. Okay, and my for loop will just, each time around the for loop, I'll just add the next element of my array into the total. And so that for loop will add together. I said sum. I'm sorry, it should be total. My variable's called total, isn't it? Sorry. So this for loop will add everything up. And then the last thing this function has to do then, this function is supposed to return it's supposed to sum all the elements in the array and return it. So the last thing I need to return is what? Total, right. Okay. So good. So now I have my two functions written, and I should be able to say build, compile, and make sure there are not any errors in it. Okay, so if everything is okay with my functions here, and C++ has all the information that it needs to translate these two functions to binary, then I should see a number 1 succeeded. Is everybody's compiling? Yeah? Okay. Now, I know, before I even get to the main program, that any main program that uses these is going to need prototypes, right? It's just like the little demo I gave you before of separate files. I know that any program that uses these is going to need to know, it's going to need prototypes at the top of the file so that C++ knows that these functions exist. So I'm going to create another file. So I'll say project, add new item, and this new item is going to be an H file, a header file. And I'm going to call it array function.h. I don't have to call it the same thing as the other files. Just, again, when you have a bunch of these files on your disk and you're looking at stuff and two of them go together, it's a lot easier to find the two that go together if they're named the same. So I'm creating this header file with the same name. And what do I want to put in the header file? I want to put the prototypes. So I'm just going to go back to this file and do a little cut and paste here, or copy and paste actually. So that's really all that needs to go in here. I just need the two signatures of both of these functions. And there are my prototypes. Okay, so now I have, again, I'm doing the same thing I kind of did in the last example, but I'm doing it backwards. I haven't even written the main, but I've created these two files that when I put them together with any main, and use them with any main, I can use these functions, right? So great. So now so we have two files. Let's add a third file, the one with our main program in. So project, add new item. And it's going to be a CPP file. CPP means it's executable. You know, the only thing we have so far that really doesn't have any executable statements in it all are those header files. So our main is going to be in yet another file. I can call it whatever I want. Okay, so now here's my empty file for my main. And my main is just going to be a little dinky program that I don't even know. Let's see, am I going to do any input or output? I don't really have to. I will though, just so you see the placement of the includes and stuff. So I will have this program print some stuff out. And since it's going to print some stuff out, I'm going to need that. And again, you might be thinking, well, why do you have to put that? You have that in the other file. The thing you have to remember is that when C++, when we write separate files, C++ looks at the files one at a time. It looks at one CPP file and compiles it. It looks at another CPP file and compiles it. If you have a program with 8 different CPP files, you compile them one at a time. And then when you go to run your program, they're all put together. So each file by itself has to have all the information that C++ needs to know what's going on. So if I'm going to print something out in this file, I need to be including IOStream. And so there's my main. And let's see, let's just keep it simple. So I need, my main's going to have this little int array. And it's going to have an int array with, let's see, with 8 numbers in it. Let's see, I'm going to just to make it really go really quickly, I'm going to write a little loop that puts numbers in my, fills up my array. So just so I have something in here. And so tell me, by looking at this, you should be able to tell me by looking at it, what values are stored in my array numbers. You can see from the for loop that I am going through every element of the array, putting something in it. What am I putting in each element? What values are stored in my array numbers? Right, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's so element 0 has a 1 in it, element 1 has a 2 in it, and so forth. So the numbers 1 through 8 are stored in my array, just so we know that, okay? Okay. I could have wrote a function to do this too, but I didn't. Okay, so now I have this, this array has stuff in it. Okay, well, I have these two functions that I'd like to use. Here's the prototypes. Here's right there an array function.h. I want to use those functions in this program. So what am I going to do? Right here, I'm going to include, and again I'm using the double quotes because this is in my project, not in the C++ library. I'm going to include array function.h. Okay? And again, that has the effect of just putting the prototypes there. And the prototypes are needed there because when this file was compiled, C++ needs to know that those functions are coming before the project runs. Okay, and then let's see, what do I need to do? Okay, I have my prototypes, so let's see, what were my functions called again? Print array and sum array. Okay, so let's suppose I say print array and I pass in numbers, which is an array, because print array takes two parameters, an array and the number of elements in it. So if I say print array numbers and I pass in 8, I pass in my array and pass in 8, that should print out my array. Should print my entire array. Matter of fact, before we go any further, let's see if this works. I'm going to compile this separately first just to make sure that it is correct language-wise. I get that number 1 succeeded. And now I should be able to, I can either build it or I can just say start without debugging and Visual Studio will build it for me. And then, okay, let's see what's it doing. It did print out my array, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Does everybody have this much working? No? No. It should work, right? Because we know how print array is written. It should work. And actually it does. It prints out my whole array and then it prints out just the first 2 elements. So it's kind of a cool function. I can, pass an array and then pass whatever a constant indicating whatever section of the array I actually want to look at. And then I have that other function, I think it's called sum array. Same thing, I can pass in my array and the number of elements in the array, or the number of elements I want to sum. And again, that particular function returns a value. And so I can store the result in a variable and then print out the variable. Okay, same idea. Okay, so I can call either of my functions. And again, if I only wanted to sum the first 3 elements in the array, I could pass in a 3 and just say the length of my array is 3. Because my function is just accepts, whatever length I say it is, and it just works with that many elements of it. So does everybody have that working? That's really all there is to passing in an array as a parameter. You just always want to make sure. You always want to make sure when you have an array, a function that works with an array, that you have that second parameter that tells how many elements there are in it, because you're going to need it you're going to need it to work through the array. I can't think of that many things you do with an array that you don't actually traverse through the array and need to know its size, right? And so that's the 3-file version of that.